Hello, and welcome to episode 43 of the PowerScore LSAT podcast. I'm Dave Kaloran in warm and summery California.
And this is Jon Denning, also in warm and sunny California, down in Los Angeles.
Is it summery there or just sunny?
Both. That summery might be a bit premature.
I mean, summer in Los Angeles is, high smog levels.
Kind of annual. Kind of year-round.
And what are you drinking down there in Los Angeles?
That is a good question. So I've been spending my weekend with the great Christopher. Don't call him Chris. The great Christopher Hitchens. And I'm having his lunchtime beverage of choice, Johnny Walker Black.
So this was a drink that he had established. This is what I'm drinking at lunch?
Yeah, pretty much. He called it the choice of queens, because apparently this is what Queen Elizabeth would drink throughout her day.
You know, if you have established yourself as having a lunchtime drink, I think you're a pretty serious drinker at that point.
I think we agree that we're both proud of him.
I do not have a lunchtime drink.
We're enamored. What are you drinking?
Well, since it's so warm here, it's been in like the 70s and 80s recently, I am drinking a Bay Breeze, which is basically a vodka cranberry with some pineapple juice in it.
Let me guess who made that for you.
What's that?
Let me guess who made that for you.
Amanda made that for me, of course.
Of course she did. Your devoted wife, who apparently wants to kill you early.
Not at all.
No? Okay.
She just wants to have fun. That's what's a possible harm. It's not like I had a lunchtime Johnny Walker.
Right. To be fair, Hitch is dead, and you're on your way.
We're all on our way.
We are, yeah.
What did I just see? I saw that old graphic from Reddit, which is death rate throughout the years, and it goes back to the Middle Ages, and it's always, of course, 100%. So the graph is always at the top. I'm like, yeah, we're all going to die. I'm not too worried about it.
You only have one child. You don't really get to speak to this. Speak
to what? I think I know about.
Speak to mortality. If you were truly beholden to the inevitable fact that we're all doomed, you'd have 13.
I'm not following your logic here. No. Yeah. I'm not a slave to procreation. One was
because
unexpected.
You don't have to be.
Yeah.
That's my point.
Actually, she wasn't unexpected. It was unexpected that I waited so long, and then I was like, all right, now we'll have children.
What was unexpected is that you did it ever.
Exactly. Yeah, that was what was unexpected. When I did it, it was expected.
I've known you a long time. The kid is the unexpected outcome.
That's okay.
But I'm so glad you did.
I am too. She's a pure joy. I'm really pleased. As I always joke with the teachers when we go for student-teacher conferences, I'm like, we like her. We're going to keep her. And they always give me the strangest look. And, of course, I enjoy my own humor. So I'm like, that's right. We're keeping her.
Good jokes. What are we listening to?
That's a question best posed for you since you have made this choice.
Thank you. I have. And as I think about this choice, I wonder if maybe you should have made it. Because I've been listening to Hozier, but he's a real depressant at times.
Well, why do I need to listen?
Well, because you tend to pick more upbeat songs, and I tend to pick more somber tunes. Andrew Burns, I think, is his name, and Hozier is what he goes by. This is a song called Shrike. Now, I think it's great. In fact, I think everything he's ever put out is great. But I also realize that I'm probably going to bum some people out.
Well, I mean, he's very moody, is the way I kind of...
One way to put it.
That's how I hear him.
He's Irish. Of course he's moody.
Everybody knows that song, Take Me to Church, which is a really cool song. But you often hear Hozier in the background, and I don't know any of the other songs, so I can't speak to this.
Well, that's a shame on you, because his catalog is wonderful.
You're like a real fanboy.
I'm a huge fanboy. Yeah, no, I'm a big fan.
Is he a Desert Island Disc guy for you?
Man, we really should get into that later, shouldn't we?
Maybe.
Desert Island Discs. There's a whole British talk show devoted to it, and I don't know that this is our time.
All right, then. I'll take that as a no.
Yeah, let's pass.
It'd be a definite no for me.
Okay. Because I could totally indulge this. It'd mostly be just all Allman Brothers if it was me.
Yeah. Depends on how many options you have. Do you have 5? Do you have 10? Do you have 50?
I would listen to 5 Allman Brothers live at the Fillmore. That would be my Desert Islands. It would just be 5 of those because I know I'm going to wear the first 4 out.
Why don't you just take it as a full band? That way you can just take the whole Allman Brothers catalog.
What do you mean as a full band?
Like, all right, instead of saying it's this album, you basically say, I'll take these 5 artists.
No, I realize what the intention is. I just know I'm going to burn through that first disc. So I'll just...
Take the whole artist.
I'm going to double down. Or quintuple down.
We'll let it go.
Thanks.
Well, let's move on to the big events of the week, which I think there was an LSAT just yesterday, was there not?
I heard all about that, yeah.
Let's talk about it.
Okay.
Let's first talk a little bit about the recent podcast they put out, one of their famous Keeping Up to Data podcasts. And this one came in at, let me see here, 4 minutes and 20 seconds. And I guarantee that was not intentional on their part. That is a pure accident.
420 was not intentional? All right.
Shorten it down a little bit, but I know that was something that just happened incidentally. There's not a whole lot here to cover. They talk about applicants are up just a shade, but they're putting out a few more applications, which are up about 1.5%. But at this point of the year, only about 60% of the numbers are in. So there's still a lot more to come down the pipeline. The one interesting thing, though, is that Canadian applications are actually up about 7.4%. So that's pretty significant overall.
What are the applicants to Canadian schools, though? Because that is maybe a little less significant.
Yeah, then the total number of people, the applicants themselves, only up 2.4%, but they're putting in 7.4% more applications. Yeah. So what you're seeing is there's a slight rise in both the U.S. and Canada in the number of people applying, but in each instance, they're putting in more applications than before, and Canadians in particular are doing so.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to think about it. People are trying their luck, basically, in more schools.
I think that's exactly the right way to do it, and it also gives you the opportunity to negotiate more depending upon the offers that you get. I've always been a fan of applying to more schools as opposed to fewer schools, depending on your situation. I mean, if you live in Minneapolis and you know you are staying there, you are limited in the number of schools that you can choose. So barring circumstances like that, I usually think it's better to apply to more schools.
Yeah, there was an easier argument to make for this degree of diversity when things were cheaper.
Yeah. Don't get me started on the,
but I'm trying to.
Well, you will.
I might.
$45 for a PDF to send to the school?
I'm needling.
Oh, no. It's a not-for-profit organization for sure. Wonder where all that money goes. Oh, that's right. You can actually take a look at their tax returns and see what they're sitting on, which is, I don't know, a couple $100 million in assets.
Don't get you started. I went straight to the ribs, and you reacted. Nice work.
Well, I'll come back,
nice work.
With a with some power on that. I'll tell you, one of these days, what we should do is we should actually do an episode that covers their tax return and breaks it down, because I look at it every year. And
how's the rest of your afternoon look?
Not looking at tax returns, man. Okay. Anyway, all that aside, there was an LSAT yesterday. And interestingly enough, if you look back through history, this is one of the smallest, if really not the smallest LSAT.
Teeny tiny.
Yeah, in modern history. Just under 13,000 registrants were there for Saturday, and fewer than that took the test ultimately.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah, of course.
I feel sometimes the interrogator. Do you think this is going to change their approach to how they offer tests in the coming year? Because they can't be pleased with such a small attendance, right?
I think they knew this was going to happen to some extent, but if you're LSAC, you're sitting in kind of a curious position because you announced this grand plan to have all these LSATs. And it was done in competition with things like the GRE, even though I know they'd planned prior to that to have more tests out there. But then the force feeding of all those tests last year caused a ton of administrative problems, which we've talked about ad nauseum. I'm not going to go into that.
Yeah, our canon's pretty deep.
Yeah, very deep. And so ultimately, they had all these tests, and it was too many. And having spoken to them and spoken to people in charge over there, they're like, yeah, it was an issue. When we ran into problems, they compounded because there was a test, and then we turned around and there's another test 4 weeks later. There's no recovery time. So I feel like that was one problem. And then when they see a really small administration like this, I would imagine for their own sake, they think to themselves, we could probably do away with that.
Yeah.
I think 8 LSATs a year is probably too many. I think 6 would be a much better number. Have them every other month, call it a day. But I also know from my conversations with them that one of the things that came up was, well, the law schools would like to see a set schedule for a while because they need to kind of like gauge what's happening, and all the changes for them are difficult as well in terms of dealing with their applicant pools. So it may be that LSAC says we want to drop it immediately, but they may not do so because the law schools are like, just keep it this way for a little bit. Let's have some stability. But 13,000 is the lowest in the last 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And so maybe they were expecting a few more, but it's really tough because of the way the registration windows close. You might not have your results from the prior test. It's kind of a jumble, and I would really like to see it sorted out. And I think 6 a year would be perfect.
I think that's kind of the Goldilocks number, as it were.
Not too hot, not too cold.
You get it.
Just right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the old February 22nd test and what the 13,000 people went through here.
Yeah. What I think maybe to start with is the fact that this was only a North American test, right?
Yeah.
We won't see another international test until March, late March.
Yeah, so it's really isolated. Now, there is a Sabbath test that is coming up on Monday that will be a different exam. So if you're taking that test and you're thinking, oh, I might learn something, I'm sorry to say that you shall not.
An accommodated test that will likely be the same exam. Yeah, there's those, but there's nothing overseas. There's nothing demanding a passport.
I'll say this. For the last 5 or 6 tests, we have started off the discussion and the recap of the exam by going through what has been at times a very lengthy list of disasters. And I am happy to say that this time around, the bad news is really kind of good news because there's not a whole lot of bad news.
Our bad news. We have less to report.
I'm happy about that because I don't want to see problems. And I think that's a function of the fact that there were far fewer test takers. There's also, that means fewer locations. And they've had more time to kind of adjust here.
Yeah, let's throw them a bone. I think they've gotten better.
They're getting better.
Yeah.
They're getting better. Somebody asked me yesterday, they're like, well, when do you think we're going to get to a point when there's no problems? And I just sighed and I was like, we're not going to get to that point because we're dealing with a lot of moving pieces. This is both complicated and complex. It's a difficult process and there's a lot of parts to it. And you are going to get some problems with that. You got bad Wi-Fi at a location? Guess what? You got an issue. You got a tablet that has some type of malfunction? It can affect the entire system. And so when we looked at what happened yesterday, the big problem that I heard about instantly was at Wake Forest University.
Yeah, that was the first one
in North Carolina. And there was a malfunction at the end of the first section, and apparently it disconnected all the people in this room from taking the test, and so they all got canceled on, which was a bit of a problem. Now, that happened to some other people as well. I had an individual student who had problems, I believe, with her tablet, and they were trying to mess around with it, and it just didn't work out. And so they finally said to her, you're canceled.
Yeah.
You've got to come back and take it. The interesting thing is that apparently the proctor told her at the site, we're not doing makeups for this test. So
yeah, I heard the same.
Yeah. So you probably won't be able to take it until March. And my response to that is, no, sir. That is completely uncool, and that's just punting the problem. Oh, sorry, you're going to take it in next month. We know that time is important in these applications. If somebody's trying to use February to a last-ditch effort to get in, or some kind of wait list or what have you, another month, that hurts.
Yeah, especially right now.
I think it's, again,
June to July, you'll live.
Yeah.
But not right now.
Well, it's a lack of understanding what your job is. Your job is to get scores to law school so law schools can make decisions. You should be doing everything within your power to get them out as quickly and efficiently as possible. To do that and make that decision, I don't think it's acceptable. So we'll have to see what happens with it. I hope that the people who are affected complain quite loudly because they have a case, they have a very reasonable argument, and given all the problems in the last 6 months, LSAC should be continuing to do everything within their power to get scores out and to get people into the testing room as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I know on some level you hate to fuel some discord fire, but Jesus, man, you kind of have to.
Yeah, I don't think I'm saying anything other than what is obvious to any kind of like reasonable observer, right?
Well, that
this isn't an
reasonable is an incredibly
opinion.
objective or subjective word. Yeah, we'll see what reasonable turns into, buddy. I'd like to think
I would
you
say
and
this it's a student-centric viewpoint, and it's completely reasonable to have that. The students have paid for the test; they have to pay for the whole process, and now all of a sudden there's these huge delays.
Is it not free? No, it's profoundly expensive. You invest yourself by every reasonable measure, and then you find yourself inconvenienced in a way that is wholeheartedly objective, like totally objectionable. I don't know how people could abide this quietly.
Well, I know people who tried to take the September test, weren't able to take it, couldn't take November, got pushed into January.
You and I have seen people sitting there now who've been trying to take the test since the last calendar year.
That's correct. I don't think it's acceptable. And sunshine is the best disinfectant. Put a spotlight on it. If people don't know about it, they don't realize they should complain about it or that it's unfair. And if you're one of the people that was affected by this, I'll just put it bluntly. Go bitch about it. And bitch about it loudly.
Yeah, raise your voice. Be the squeaky wheel.
Yeah, that's not disparaging. That's just calling it what it is.
Yeah. So and I think that's what have we told people? I think we've probably raised our voice enough about this, although other people should as well. What have we told people to do as they walk into a test that presents this potential?
Well, that's a little bit easier because at least we can prepare people mentally for it.
Can we? I mean, as best we can.
I cannot prepare anybody for a catastrophic failure of the equipment that they're using.
Yeah, I can't prepare you to be sent home.
Yeah, there's nothing we can do about that. The things that we've run into in the past where people are delayed, where there's check-in issues, what we've always said and will continue to say is when you walk into today's LSAT, mentally prepare yourself for problems. Be aware the proctor might not know what's going on, that there might be check-in issues, that there might be a delay in starting, that there might be pauses out of the blue during the test, that the proctor might not understand the angles that you can put the tablet at are everything except completely vertical.
Yeah, I hate to say, but there's still the potential that they might not know you're allowed to have a pencil.
Yeah, there's all sorts of problems here. Be aware of it, know what your rights are, and most importantly, advocate for yourself. Speak up. Don't get pushed around on a test that really you need to take control of and is so important to not just getting into schools, but the financial impact it has in terms of what you're offered.
Yeah, we talk a lot about taking control of this test in terms of your own experience with it, but the truth of the matter is this actually counts as part of that. Control the entire test day.
That's what you have to do. So, again, the summary, though, is the good news was this was by far the best of the digital administration so far in terms of a lack of problems and even reported proctor issues.
Yeah.
So that bodes well for the rest of the year, and hopefully they continue to improve. And I'm waiting for the day when nobody, sends me a message or emails me or what have you and says, all right, I got sent home.
Yeah.
Or my room got sent home. I know, and the cool thing is I know at least that LSAC feels the same way.
Oh, they want to get it right.
Yeah, they totally want to get it right. If you're in Newtown, Pennsylvania, you're thinking to yourself, please, I don't want to give this guy anything more to report.
Yeah, let's shut these two up, please.
Yeah, I know they listen, but I think they laugh about it because they're like, well, it happened.
I hope I hope they listen. I know they listen. I hope they laugh.
30 years ago, they could sweep this under the rug. You can't do that anymore, and that's, I think, for the better. So let's get on to the test itself now that we kind of know what happened and that generally it went pretty well. Let's talk about the overall test and our general impressions of it and what we heard from students and what people were really saying about this. Kind of give people a perspective and a baseline to understand the exam that they just took.
Yeah.
John, you want to make a disclaimer before we start?
Well, the general disclaimer that we always give is that there's only so much that we're willing to reveal. Which is to say, we're not going to talk about individual questions. We're not going to talk about individual answers. We won't give you any strategies. We won't provide for anyone out there who has yet to take the test, which is, at this point is probably no one. But we're not going to talk about anything that would allow someone to get a leg up. Is that what you were hoping I would say?
To some extent. Everything that we're talking about is basically public information.
Yes.
And this means that LSAC allows test takers to talk about the generalities of the exam. I can talk about what the game topic was. I'm not going to tell you how many questions were on each game, even though I happen to know that.
Or weren't there a lot of D's or whatever? We're not going
we're not going to talk about that. I'm not going to tell you the setup to the third game, even though I happen to know that. So the thing is we're not disclosing things that we've encountered and information that we actually know.
Right.
We're keeping it general, and that's to accord with LSAC's rules on this, which I think are very reasonable and I think protect the entire sphere of test takers.
It's the integrity of the test, yeah.
Yeah.
And we want to abide by that too.
Yeah. So let's take a look at it. First off, this test had 101 questions. Mm-hmm. We know that there were 23 logic games questions, 27 RC, and then one of the scored LR was 25 and the other was 26. So the classic 101 question setup that you have.
By far the most standard thing you would see.
Yeah, this is the most common number. When we were looking at experimental sections and orders, one of the things that jumped out to me was plenty of LR experimentals. Seemed like there was only one logic games experimental floating around out there. I didn't see anybody or hear of anybody with a reading comprehension experimental, which I find it so curious, the pattern that they're using, because there's been a couple tests in the last 6 months where there was no logic games experimental. And then, of course, last July, there was only LR experimentals. So this time, they're like, all right, we're good on RC. Now, if somebody's like, no, man, I had 2 RC. Cool.
Let us know.
Send me a message.
Yeah, please message us.
Tell me that you exist out there. I'm not aware of your existence, and I would like to know of it.
We are oblivious to you.
The overall take on this test, though, is that on the whole, and that's a really important phrase, and I'll explain a little bit later, on the whole, it was reasonable. Does this mean that there were no hard questions on the test? No. Okay, so if you're thinking, what? I can't believe he's saying it was easy. That third game killed me. I understand that. There's always hard questions.
I saw you get into this conversation with someone on Reddit the other day.
Yeah.
And I actually appreciated the way that you handled it, as I generally do with you handling things. But yeah, you said, what is the truth? There can be elements that are difficult, but that doesn't make the test itself on the whole difficult.
Yeah.
And I think that distinction is lost on some people.
Well, I think some people were mad. And we'll get to it because I made a scale prediction that was relatively tight. And I would say, to put it mildly, that chafed a few people.
Yeah, I'd say chafed is a political way to put it.
Some people were, of course, they wanted my immediate explanation for that. I was like, look, I will talk about it on the podcast.
How dare you, son? Yeah.
But in the meantime, you know how I respond to criticism. My view of it is, let's talk about it.
I don't.
Yeah, well, you've never criticized me, of course.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
No,
anyway, no, of course I can.
The thing is every single LSAT out there has hard questions. So the existence of hard questions doesn't all of a sudden tell me, oh, it's a really loose scale.
Right.
That's not how we respond and take a look at it. We already know that's going to be there. The real question is, how many of them are there? And what's the general difficulty of the rest of the questions?
Right. It's a preponderance issue, not a individualized.
Yeah. So the problem is that when people take a test, they focus on what they recall as being the toughest. And we'll start with logic games here and break it down, because there was a game on this test, the third game, that was about stores and they've been called the market game.
Right.
But really it's like stores and ultra stores and various features that they had. This game was clearly difficult. And if you took this test, you're like, oh man, I didn't like that game. And then you think to yourself, the whole test was hard. But that's not really how it works. Yes, this game was difficult. It had a lot of moving parts. But that doesn't mean that the rest of the section was even that tough. One of the things I pointed out to people was the first two games, and let's run through it right now.
Yeah.
So the first game, if I recall, was about paintings. The commentary that you saw online about this was zero. A lot of people couldn't remember the topic. Certainly nobody was thinking that it was overly tough. And the reports that we got individually from test takers and instructors, they didn't even really mention it, which means that it was pretty standard. The second game was about a family portrait and photos to some extent, and it was the same exact thing. I saw and heard a number of comments from people that were like, I was breezing after the first two games. And I'm like, Of course, we've talked about that before. If things are really great halfway through, you better expect something.
Buckle up.
Yeah, something's coming. The roller coaster's about to dip. So in that sense, the third game came up, and then, of course, especially compared to the relative ease of the first two, that third game looked even harder.
Yeah.
And for some people, it swallowed them up. And they never got to the last game, which was about libraries and readings.
It's a really interesting way to put it. The consumption aspect of what a singular moment can do on this test.
Yeah. I think, when I look at that section, I can appreciate the difficulty of the stores game. All right. I have a pretty good sense of how that game was set up and the rules and all that kind of thing. But do I think that it was like the hardest game ever? No, of course not. I'm not even sure where it stands in the pantheon of difficult games, or if it's in the difficult game, top 15, for example. It's really hard to see without the questions. I know there's some information that you could deduce about that game that made it easier. But that said, as far as the whole section...
And only that said, by the way.
Yeah, that's as far as I'm going.
Yeah.
The rest of that section wasn't terrible. And the people who were able to get through the stores game, they felt a little pressed on that libraries, the fourth game, because they felt they had lost some time on the third game. But again, looking at the span of test takers, and it's particularly looking at high scores, a lot of them came out and said, I felt all right about this section.
Yeah.
I might have lost a couple of questions, but overall, this was pretty good section for me as like a high scoring test taker. That is going to inform our view of the curve as it comes down.
Of course. Yeah. That's exactly what I heard. So.
Now, interestingly enough, you look at tests, and one of the things that Jon and I have talked a lot about, and he's certainly one of the experts on this, is, was this a reuse of a prior February test or some type of international test? And in this case, that didn't happen.
No, doesn't
this
seem
was
to be.
It was a newly assembled LSAT that they had. Now, when I say that, that does not mean that the questions were new and had never been seen. All right, everything gets pre-tested.
I'm glad you're taking the time to explain this, because this is misunderstood.
The experimental sections are still used. What it means is they've never used this test in its entirety. And obviously, we've been tracking tests for years.
In its released form.
In its full released form. They'd used pieces of it previously. They tested parts of it. And somebody was asking me about that. They're like, I don't understand how you can, know this. I'm like, well, dude, it's my job. All right. And I try to do a good job with it. I try to focus on what's happening and actually track this. And I don't expect someone who's taking the LSAT this year to care or know about what happened 7 years ago. But I do.
Or 27. Yeah.
Yeah. The example that I'd use was on the January test, there was that game about beer. And of course, that's really notable. Beer on the LSAT. This is awesome.
I just figured that was close to your heart for other reasons. But
it is. But that was a game that had appeared individually on both the June 2017 and June 2018 administrations of the test in experimental form. And so they brought it back finally and used it in January. So we track these things. Right. But if you're a student who's taking the test and you're like involved in this for 3 to 4 months, you should just know that that's what we do, and that can help you in the long run because it tells us the direction the test is taking. But you don't need to spend your time doing that.
Yeah.
That's like It's not a good use of your time. It's a good use of our time.
Is it though? Regardless, it is.
Yeah, it is.
It is.
I'm going to put that to rest right there.
Okay. It is a use of our time.
It's a good use of our time.
Trust what we say.
Well, I think we've proven we know what we're talking about when it comes to this.
Yeah,
I don't see anyone else out there who has like the database that we do on past administrations.
No, we are far ahead of the curve when it comes to this.
Yeah, when we've been asked to remove certain things from the general public sphere because it's too informative, then you're hitting on all cylinders at that point.
We are the late and great Christopher Hitchens of content when it comes to this. We know exactly what we're talking about.
Have your Johnny Walker now.
He knew booze the way that we know LSAT.
Well, there you go. So anyway, if you came out of that logic game section, you felt shaken by that third game, that was not abnormal. All right. So I think that should at least reassure a lot of people. It's like, okay, no one's saying it was easy. It was a challenge. I think if you think back to the first two games, you might realize, oh, you know what? I did pretty well on those. So maybe I had a little bit more leeway. And this is part of how we start to look at the curve, so to speak, and formulate that by realizing there were easier parts as well as harder parts.
Which we will come to in just a second. Before we do, let's talk about the rest of it. Do you want to do RC or LR?
Let's go to RC.
Okay.
The other big and easy one, especially because apparently no experimentals floating around to kind of confuse anybody.
Wasn't that strange? I felt my feeling on the RC from what I was hearing, and you may have a slightly different take because we talked to different people, was that it was hard but not overwhelming. Not, in a word, devastating.
Yeah.
Did you agree? Did your sense of it kind of equate to that?
Yeah, I definitely didn't think it was easy. The feedback, you heard different things about the different passages. Mm-hmm. So let's go through the passages and then kind of tie it to that. So again, we think this is the rough order of the passages, just like with the games. The first passage was the comparative set.
Which is unusual, by the way. I can't remember the last time, or the only time I've really ever seen the first passage be comparative.
It's been comparative before, but it's a lower percentage than having it later.
Yeah.
It's the lowest placement position of the four on a historical basis.
A very historically fair way to put it. That was kind of my point, but
yeah, and this was the one about gold and miners, and then both San Francisco and Mali. It sounds interesting to me, and I heard some people say it was interesting to read, not fun, but at least of some interest. And I live pretty close to San Francisco, so for me, I would have been like, all right, that's pretty cool. And I know where Sutter's Mill is, and drive past it whenever I go out to Nevada. Sorry.
Get it right, Dave. we will get an email.
I'm always second guessing myself. I have to say it twice.
Nevada.
So that was the comparative. I don't think it was a bad start to that section. I think the second passage is where things went a little bit awry. Mm-hmm. And that was the one about literature. It was about this novel. And I heard this was a difficult to read passage that was hard to absorb, hard to get a grip on. And probably, I think if we're talking about the overall difficulty of the four passages, it seems to me this was the hardest.
This probably, that was the vibe I got.
Which sucks because I don't want to see the hardest passage second.
It's too early. It's too soon.
Yeah. I want to see it third or fourth, preferably fourth, so that you get to it at the end after having gotten, hopefully cherry-picked a bunch of easier questions. So to me, it seemed as if the overall discussion was this one was hard to read, which was a little bit in comparison to the third passage, which was about a new tax plan or new tax regime, where it wasn't as hard to read, but the questions were more difficult, or at least a little bit more challenging.
Unusual in a way.
And you might be thinking, man, the second and third passages were tough. Again, were they historically tough? No. This wasn't on the par of the hardest RC of all time. But again, still challenging. Yeah. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying it's maybe you're picking up questions where you don't realize you're getting them right, whereas on other tests you might have missed those. And then the last passage was the more science-based idea about ice cores.
Yeah.
With an ice ball kind of thing.
I would have been bummed by this section because it made me wait till the end for science.
Yeah, you would have enjoyed the ice cores one.
I know all kinds of things about ice cores. How much time you got?
Not
enough.
0 for that.
0. Okay.
I don't want to hear you talk about it. And ice cores is one of those things that's been tested a couple of times in recent years. This isn't the first time ice cores has come up where there, it appeared on the exam. Previously, some experimentals. So again, I feel like this was maybe the harder part of the test. It's hard to know without actually looking at it and breaking it down and seeing the stats on it.
Yeah.
But I feel like the beginning of this wasn't too bad. Then they hit you a little bit, but at least it was a humanities type of topic that they hit people on. It wasn't super difficulty in the science. This wasn't the peptides passage that we saw recently.
Yeah. That's true.
And that makes a big difference. Like the type of difficulty they hit you with and, how they present it can have a huge effect. This one was a little more favorable there. So I will take it.
I can tell already, both of us, in discussing this, we're already kind of leaning into what is going to be our curve prediction.
Oh, yeah.
I can feel you.
I got to ask.
I can feel you
asked about
justifying it.
I got asked more about it yesterday than almost any other occasion because it was a little tighter than normal.
Yeah. Well,
and
we'll get
to it.
We'll get there.
We're already started in on it.
Yeah, if you can't tell already. Before we do that, let's talk about LR.
LR is always a little bit more sprawling. Again, section of 25, section of 26 that was on there. If you're trying to figure out what was real and what was experimental, let's just run a few topics through here that we know were real. And on our form, we have a few extra topics listed as well. Probably the question I heard the most about was the yawning question.
Yeah.
Which I heard was, easy to read, but the answer choices made no sense. So, of course, now I want to see that question.
And we never will, which is the giant bummer.
Yeah, we'll see it eventually, but it might be quite a while.
I don't know that we will, buddy.
Yeah, they typically release these at some point. It may be 15 years from now.
You and I got to live a whole lot longer than I think any doctor would anticipate.
I'm planning on it.
Are you?
Yeah, you're in a kind of like a depressive, dark mood today.
It's Hosier. It's all the Hosier.
Hitchens, this Johnny Walker Black that you're drinking.
Johnny Walker Black. Like my mood.
It's gotten under your skin. And I am, of course, upbeat and happy.
I know. It's a real turn of pace for the two of us.
That's not really true.
What? Normally, you're so bleak.
What?
You are. You are.
Pure lie.
No, normally you're the dark mood, and I'm the one trying to enliven this.
You keep telling yourself that, and everyone will keep nodding.
That's how I sleep at night.
Yeah.
Thank you.
They're coming around to give you your shot soon.
All right, I'm yawning.
It's time for you to go to bed. So the yawning question, I think, was one that came up. There was one about nephrons and kidneys.
Yeah.
There was about adults watching TV for the national and international news. There's one about hand washing with like air dryers and paper towels and bacteria.
Yeah.
Pretty comical.
Well, yeah, Dyson's nightmare.
Yeah. One about road congestion, which has been on recent tests as an experimental, turning something from a two-way into a one-way road. There's one about green and black tea and cancer in mice. The list goes on. There's other ones like hedge fund managers and so forth. But again, the thing that was most notable to me was, aside from one or two questions that we expect to be difficult, you didn't hear a whole lot of people, and I didn't get a whole lot of reports from people who are in the know that, this was really difficult.
Yeah.
A lot of people felt this was more of a throwback section. It was a little bit more straightforward, didn't have a lot of the hidden right answer choices that we saw on some of the recent LSATs.
Say 2018. When you say throwback, I'm going to put your feet to the fire a little bit and ask you to name a year.
That's tough because...
I know, that's why.
I mean, I would probably go back to like 2012 to 2014.
Okay. I was going to say 2015, 2016. I
think, from what I can tell, they have reused stimuli topics from that vicinity, like in the 70s. So, insofar as that's the case, it definitely throws back to that era. But I'm talking more about
70s, not 19.
Yeah, but I'm talking not about the stimuli. I'm talking about the answer choices and the construction of those.
Okay.
And again, this isn't prejudicial to anybody listening to it. They're not going to really know what I'm referring to.
No one's going to read June 2014 and be like, oh, now I'm ahead. No.
I'm just talking about the way the problems were constructed, even though, and that's an interesting point we just kind of glossed over, it appears that some of the stimuli had appeared on prior LSATs, and this has been happening recently. If not word for word in one or two instances, at least largely topically. And this is a function of the pressure that they're under to create so many tests in such a short period of time that reusing something from several years ago starts to look really attractive.
And look, we know they do this anyway. Remember all those waggle dance passages in reading comp on the Bs that were like 4 years or 3-4 years in a row? Like, they do this.
And they also have the same topics. Oh, dinosaurs, once again, it's on every LSAT. Right. Serotonin, let's learn about serotonin. I've learned more about serotonin from the LSAT than any other single source.
Have you?
Yeah.
God, we should talk more often.
I was not a science major like you,
well, so. It's serotonin.
I'll say it however I want, man. You don't like serotonin? It's Sarah. Whatever, dude.
Well, come on.
Is it tomato or tomato? Is it Nevada or Nevada?
Potato.
We know it's Nevada.
We do know now that it's Nevada. That has been conclusively demonstrated.
Yes, it was conclusively proven
by Nevadans.
Nevadans. You screwed it up.
I know.
Well,
anyway.
Either way, this was 50% of the test. And I think these were two very reasonable sections. And that goes a long way towards informing the next topic for our discussion, which is...
Let's get to it. Now, here we come.
Here we come, curve.
Yeah.
So, LSAT curves really range anywhere from about, you can miss 8 to get a 170 to you can miss 14 to get 170. Is it a real curve? No, it's not, but it's a common marker that it's developed over years and years. We didn't start it. Everybody uses this to kind of talk about the top line difficulty.
When you say is it a real curve, just to clarify for any of the uninformed listening, what do you mean?
What I mean is it's adjusted according to the difficulty, not according to performance.
Right.
It's not like what they do in certain colleges where they're trying to set certain numbers and so forth.
Yeah.
They use the difficulty to attempt to produce the same bell curve of scores every single time. If you have a test that is extremely difficult in terms of the logical difficulty, they allow you more misses to get the same 170 as opposed to a test where the logical difficulty overall is much less or lower, then they tighten up the scale.
Right. And I suppose to maybe double down on or clarify that point, when we talk about a curve, we are talking about a 170.
Yeah.
We're talking about how many questions you can miss out of however many questions there are, in this case 101, to allow you to achieve a 170.
Exactly right.
Right. So for the uninitiated out there, which at this point of the year of the LSAT kind of time frame, I assume is quite a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. A lot of people coming into this right now. So you and I talked about it yesterday before I tweeted this out. And I think that it's an interesting debate. The curve that we came out with was 9. So you can miss 9 to get a 170. And my first reaction to posting that was, don't hate me.
You are you're a bit of a scoundrel.
I was like, it's not my fault, man. Don't kill the messenger kind of thing. I'm going to call it truthfully. It would have been a lot easier for me to put -10 on that and make everybody happier, but that's not how I felt about it.
Especially given the fact that we'll never know.
I think we'll know.
What kind of
timeline? It could be 10 years, John. The number of tests that they have are going to force them to reuse and release these tests. They're not just going to go into the vault for 30 years. This is going to come back out in like 10 years, man.
When was the last February test that got released?
The last February one is that one from Test Prep C, which is an unknown year.
Okay. I would say it's been at least 15 years?
Well, that test is actually more recent than that, but some of the prior tests, when you go back and you actually number them out, they're like 99, 2000. Okay. It's been a while.
20. So for anyone out there listening to me and Dave have a debate, I think you see who just won.
Right, but then I just pointed out the mitigating factor here about they're now doing way more tests. It's really difficult. They're going to reuse these tests. That's going to speed up the releases.
Do you think anyone roots for a side here?
My side.
No, I think they mostly just want us to shut up. or move on.
That's not the case.
No.
I disagree with you because what they're thinking is, I would like to see this test. Now, they'd like to see it in a month. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is that on that -9, it is based upon the entirety of the test. It is not built around some kind of specific difficulty.
Right.
Yes, that Stores game was difficult. That wasn't enough to make me think that this was -12. Right. In fact, I would argue quite strongly this was not a -11, 12, 13, or 14 test. The other thing is this. When you've just taken the LSAT and you come out, it's a rough experience. I don't care if it went well. It's rough. It's physically draining. It's mentally kind of anguishing. It's an emotional experience. It's really hard to gauge difficulty when you just took the test because you look at it and you're like, it all sucked.
That's a really good point. I think a lot of people overlook that fact of their own unique experience, especially just the agony, the physical agony of it.
Yeah. They come out and they're like, that was rough.
That sucked.
And -9, and then they see that and they immediately want to like firebomb me. And I'm like,
certainly it was harder than that because I feel awful.
Exactly.
Like, well, that's not quite how these things are determined.
Yeah, it's much more relative in that sense.
Can we spin it? I think we can probably spin this into a positive. I know I
do it.
Can.
I agree. So let's hit it.
Okay. Which is to say, a tighter scale isn't necessarily a negative thing for you as a test taker. In fact, I think one could easily see a tighter scale as a bonus, as a benefit, because what it means is the content you just experienced was more decipherable. Fair?
Yeah. It means that you're not likely to have a lot of, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I missed that question.
Right. It didn't beat you up as badly as it could have.
Yeah, the scariest thing about a test to me when I'm looking at students taking it and I have my concerns for them is I can see a question that has a built-in wrong answer that's incredibly attractive. And I know that they're going to hit that answer and be like, oh, there it is. And then move on without, really kind of giving the rest of the answers a proper analysis, or they might and they still don't even realize it was wrong.
Yeah.
Those scare me more than anything because that's where somebody says, I did this, and then they get their score back and they think, how did that happen? I'm like, well, I can show you how it happened. And they got you here, here, and here.
Yeah.
This test, as far as I can tell, didn't have as many questions like that. And that, to me, has a big impact on the scale.
Yeah.
But that also means that's why it's going to be a little bit tighter because they're like a little more straightforward. You don't get as much latitude to miss questions.
Yeah. Unforeseeable traps, surprising traps. That, to me, is this test's ultimate danger.
Yeah. So the other thing that was really interesting was somebody said to me, all right, -9, whatever, I hate you. If you
Did
didn't
they say
choose...
I hate you?
Yeah, people jokingly.
Okay, all right.
Dave, you're making me mad. That's
okay,
kind of messages that I get.
That seems a little more of the tone.
Oh, it's not aggressive.
Die, Dave.
Yeah, it's not like that. It's more like in jest and like, I wish you weren't doing that. And I'm like, I'm sorry.
Sorry, man.
I must be honest about it.
Speak the truth.
Somebody said, all right, you've gone with -9. If you didn't do that, what would you go with? Mm-hmm. And I love that question, quite honestly, because it allows us to reveal a little bit of what our thinking is. If we didn't go with -9, I would most definitely go with -10.
Same. Though, in fact,
this would not have been a -8 test to me.
Dave, you and I speak about these things every time before we post anything publicly. My instinct was 10.
Yeah.
Now you talk me out of it. I think you're correct. I've come to board your ship.
Here's the thing, though. I want to make this point about the prediction. If this was a world in which we could comfortably say, all right, we think it's one of these two, and we could come out and say, we think it's -9 or -10,
yeah.
My confidence level would be like 99% on this.
And you know what? Our accuracy level would be 99%.
I think historically, we'd almost have every single LSAT in history because we're either on it or off by one.
I don't
typically
think we've ever
been
more than one off.
Yeah, it doesn't. I can't recall it off the top of my head. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but
somebody can fact check me and.
It doesn't matter. If they were like, oh, you missed this one 4 years ago, I'd be like, okay, that happens. But the point is this, is that we would have a really high accuracy if we had that interval that we could do it.
Yeah.
The problem is as soon as you try to do that, someone's like, you're hedging. I'm like, dude, this is not the easiest thing to do. But the bigger point is this. Because of the way the scale works, where it actually is a single number, that's why we predict it as a single number.
Yeah.
That lowers my confidence a little bit, but it doesn't like shatter it. It's not like, oh, I have a 30% confidence. No, I have like at least a 75 to 80% confidence in this.
Well, listen,
it's just that,
you and I have had this conversation, and I don't feel like I'm shading to say that the way that I explained our prediction of scale in the past wasn't so much as a number, but a general estimation, a take on the overall difficulty, the nature of the test itself.
Yeah, this test was not a logically hard test as compared to other LSATs.
That's perfect.
It's going to turn out to be on the medium, I think more towards the easier side, which sounds crushing, but as I've explained repeatedly throughout this episode, is not what it sounds like. There's still hard questions on here.
Right. And also, how dare you shrink away, not you, anyone, shrink away from a test that is on the whole logically easier? Why wouldn't you want that?
Well, you would. I'm not hedging to 10.
No,
I'm saying I still think it's 9. I mean, I feel comfortable with that. I felt comfortable with it very early on. There was nothing that shook me off that. It's just that if somebody said you can't have 9, it's blocked out, I would go to 10. I wouldn't go to 8 because I feel like you can't tell entirely with things like the RC and the LG. There might have been something in there that people missed and they didn't realize it. And when we see the test, whenever that may be, if ever, then we'll figure it out from there.
You're never the optimist in these episodes.
I'm always the optimist. What are you talking about?
Come on.
The only time I'm not an optimist is when I'm having to explain the problems that exist in the administration of the test.
Fair enough. We've agreed. I've listened to too much Hitchens and Hosier.
Yeah, apparently so. You're depressed this weekend.
I am. I'm in a depressive mood.
Next time we're going to talk about your love life and find out what's going on there. Maybe that's informing your depression.
You know what I think it is I spent literally the entire weekend with my buddy's girlfriend, this Victoria's Secret model, staggering human, and I'm in love with her roommate.
I don't even, that was a wild ride.
I know.
I spent the entire weekend with my buddy's girlfriend. Okay, that sounds bad.
No. That to me was the upside.
I think you're saying it was a platonic friendship.
Yeah, she's my pal.
You were squiring her around town, were you not?
I was indeed.
Excellent.
But I sent her a book to her place in New York where she's not, clearly because she's out here in LA, and her roommate intercepted it and started reading. And I'm over the moon for a roommate. I know, I fall in love so easy.
Post-relationship Johnny is an interesting character.
It's a hot mess.
Let's close this out.
All right.
Next time we'll talk about your love life. We'll give everybody an update on who you're seeing.
For anyone who listened to the very end of this to get to hear that, I feel like...
Sorry for they just wasted a minute.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this test, we now know it's in the books. It seems to be a pretty reasonable exam. Let's hope that we're completely wrong about the scale and it's like minus 16.
Yeah, minus 30.
Yeah, your scores will be coming out on Tuesday, March 17th, which is a very interesting date. They are seriously releasing these on St. Patrick's Day.
Do you want to tell me, or tell whoever's still somehow listening to this who didn't just shut it off after my love life, tell them the fact that you told me the other day.
Oh, the way you can remember this?
Uh-huh.
All right, it's a little mathematical thing. If you are trying to remember the dates of Valentine's Day and St. Patrick's Day, there's a little mathematical thing. So we know that Valentine's Day is February 14th, so 214. Well, the square root of 2 is 1.4. And the square root of 3 is 1.7. So that's 317. So 214 is Valentine's Day, 317 is St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah.
And I've never forgotten St. Patrick's Day after that.
Square root of 2 has a 0.4, 214. Square root of 3 has a 0.17. I love that so much.
Yeah, it's really cool that it actually works out that way. And I'm Irish too, so I'll probably do the score release in the morning and then hopefully start day drinking thereafter. Guinness all day long. It's going to be fantastic.
I'll be in New York chasing models.
You do that. Yeah. I know Amanda's going to make corned beef and cabbage because she loves doing that. So it's going to be a great day.
All right. Well, sign us out, Dave.
I will do that indeed. So if you get a chance, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else you find it in the wide world. Give us a rating, and if you have any questions, you can send those to lsatpodcast@powerscore.com. On behalf of John and myself, have a great week, and we will be talking to you soon. Take care.